local environmental problems, regional problems like acid rain. Now we've got a whole new category of global or strategic problems, which include the hole in the ozone layer, which now could appear above the United States, global climate change, the destruction of the rainforests at a rate that means they'll be totally gone in another few decades unless we stop, the pollution of the oceans and the atmosphere, and the like.
I almost forgot about the hole in the ozone layer. You probably won't remember. It depends on how old you are, but when I was a kid, they were telling us that women with their hairspray, you know how women are, they spray all this stuff on. The hairspray was putting holes in the ozone layer. I wonder if Kay's old enough. Joining me now, my buddy Kay Smythe with the Daily Caller, social decline and apocalypse writer. Kay, you're not old enough to remember the ozone layer talk, are you?
No, I absolutely am that old. Thank you so much for thinking that I'm not. That means a lot. No, it was every time I opened the fridge, I was destroying the ozone. And hairspray was the other big one. There was something else as well, but it escapes me now. I mean, the list really, truly goes on.
Why do these people still keep a straight face when they make the predictions that all these things are going to happen? They never, ever, ever come true. I remember they had to take signs down from Glacier National Park in Montana because they said all the ice caps would be gone, and then they were all still there, so they just took the sign down.
Listen, a lot of people make a lot of money off the manipulation of climate change rhetoric. So when I was at university studying this, I was so lucky to have a professor who told us, for the most part, the truth. I was able to learn about the field of uncertainty, which is an entire academic course in any kind of climate study, where we basically say, okay, so this is what we think is going to happen. But there's this huge margin of uncertainty where it turns out that we don't actually have a clue. So when I see major corporations, or I guess emerging corporations, I should say, and global elites both making huge sums of money off the sort of, I don't want to say the myth of climate change, because the climate does fluctuate. We can sort of dig into that a little bit if you want. But what we're going through right now is absolutely nowhere near as bad as what it's been like in the past. We know this from proxy data. And there's not really anything that we can do to mitigate the impact of the climate. We can sort of live within it. We can't do anything to stop it. So the rhetoric's going to continue so long as people still can make money off making people disbelieve that there is anything that can be done.
Speak about the climate changing, because the climate does change. It goes through patterns and things like that. It's not your freaking SUV or your hairspray, but climate does change.
It does change. Oh, Jesse, thank you so much for asking me this. I never get to talk about this stuff. So basically, the way that climate has changed throughout history, and when I say history, I mean well predating what we think of as modern civilization. So, for example, let's go back about 11,800, 12,600 or so years ago, when the planet went through this period called the Younger Dryas, which was a rapid moment of fluctuation. And when you look at proxy data and graphs of this time period that represent what the climate was doing, I'm sorry, my cat loves when I talk about climate stuff. I apologize. But basically, when we look at what was going on during the Younger Dryas, we have a scale, say, that's about this wide. And so we're looking at different climate fluctuations going back about, say, like a foot of space. And now that kind of fluctuation, we're talking about, potentially tens, if not 100-degree change in some instances. Right now, that same proxy data that we've tracked that far back is about this wide. And excuse me, I'm sorry, this is my life. And so when we look at that change now, it's about this big. So we're talking about fluctuations that really don't impact us in any of the same way that it has before. And I think the ignorance of that aspect of the science is one of the most damning things that global elites have done to both the education system and to the mass manipulation of the public that has instilled this fear that everything that we do is going to end up killing us, when that's just really not the case. Like, things have been a lot worse in the past with absolutely no macro influence from human civilization. And what we're going through in terms of change right now, isn't really that dramatic.
Is it ignorance, Kay, or is it something more nefarious? Because it sure seems more nefarious to me. They don't seem ignorant at all. They seem like they know what they're doing. They know it's all a lie, but they do it anyway for money and power and to look important and feel good about themselves.
I think you're right, Jesse. I think it is something more nefarious. You know, I go back and forth on this because in some instances, I look at the data and I think, okay, there's no way to really refute this. Like, we've been lied to as a public about what climate change actually is. But then I've also met people who work in politics, and I talk to a lot of people who do politics. And I think most of these people aren't actually smart enough to pull off a manipulation like this on purpose. So I think this has been going on for a lot longer, this sort of fear and manipulation, maybe even as long as like the last 100 years, if you want to sort of drag the energy sector into it and what they benefit in terms of have benefited from in terms of making us feel terrible about day-to-day human life. But what I think this really comes down to, Jesse, is that we've become so exceptionally greedy as a civilization that we literally cannot keep up with the demand for things that we don't really need. The global elites know that, so they're probably thinking, okay, we have two ways to deal with this. If we want to keep up with the current level of control and modernity, we can either scare people into living limited lives, which would essentially hand over control or more control to these global elites to do with what they want, or they can just systematically start getting rid of a bunch of us. And I think that both things are probably true. I dread to think what will happen over the next decade in terms of how that manipulation will turn into action, particularly out here in the West. But we do have an unsustainable relationship with the natural world that every single one of us today can fix right at home. It's as simple as putting a little bit of money, and I say a very little bit of money, into growing some of your own foods. Even if you live in an apartment, you can do this. You can start living in such a way that doesn't indulge in the greed in the same way that we have been for so long. I'm not telling anyone to give anything up because this is America. Like, freedom is the number one thing here, and that's all I really care about. But if you do want to sort of weather the mismanagement of the global elites in terms of this crisis, both sociologically and environmentally, you just got to return to a slightly more natural way of living. Stop buying everything that you're getting told to buy by the Kardashians and celebrities, and just, I don't know, just calm down a little bit. Don't indulge so much in that corporate culture. And it all comes from the woke side of the spectrum, so stop putting your money towards it anyway.
That's why I stopped showering last month. I've never felt better. Kay, thank you. I appreciate you.